Hello, Yosemite Church. This week we wrapped up another one of our sermon series, Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. And in doing so, we wrestled with many different topics on what it means to really pursue God in all of who we are, but especially through our emotions, because they're such a huge indicator of how we're doing, where we're going, and really what our relationship with God is like. This week, we ended it with talking about how we want to live out of our weakness. Now, in our day and age, it's so easy to get caught up in great stories of strength. As somebody who has spent their whole life growing up and watching the Olympics, I love to see these stories of men and women overcoming great hardship, finding the strength within them in order to do something great. But when we look at how the Lord calls us to live, it is not to say that we can't have strengths, but it is to say that He works in us primarily through our weaknesses. And I want to really bring out the contrast between sometimes how we try to live and how God blesses us as we live out of our weakness through one story in the Bible. Now, this story has always been one of my favorite stories since I was very small. But when I was small, I liked it because it was as close as anything could be to a superhero story. And I loved superheroes growing up. And I was very small. I was always the smallest in my class, so I loved the superheroes that were the biggest and the strongest. Well, if there was anybody in the Bible that seemed to capture that, it was the story of Samson, a man of great strength. He vanquished so many of his enemies, and in doing so overcame them time and time and time again. But for those of you who may not know the story of Samson as well, it's found in Judges. It starts in Judges 13 and then continues on through Judges 16. It's the story of how one man allows his strength to fuel his pride, and then his pride brings about his destruction, and his destruction brings down his fall. So it goes something like this. When Samson is born, his father is spoken to by heavenly sources saying, "Your son will be blessed. He will judge the nation of Israel, and especially those nations around that are trying to conquer them, specifically the Philistines." And as Samson grows up, we see that this is indeed true. He has great strength, and that strength is fueled by the fact that there is an oath. He must not cut the hair on his head. Well, he lives his whole life growing out that man bun. But in the end, he still doesn't cut his hair, and his strength just grows and grows and grows. Eventually, he falls in love, he gets married, but then he sees another woman that draws his fancy. And as men often do who are captured in practicing living out of their own strength, he takes her as well. And this woman eventually convinces him to give up his secret of his strength. See, she was a Philistine, and she was out to try to eliminate an enemy. And so Samson tells her his secret. And while he's sleeping, she cuts his hair, and he loses all of his strength. The Philistines come in, they imprison him, they blind him, and they throw him in slavery, where he's working out the rest of his days. Eventually, there's this big party because the Philistines have overcome their enemies. They're praising to their gods about how they have delivered their enemy to them. And they say, "Why don't we bring out Samson so that we can point at him and laugh? We can use him as a source of enjoyment for the evening's entertainment." And sure enough, they bring him out, and he's blind. And as he's brought out in chains, he says to the young boy who's carrying his chains, bring me to the pillars upon which this house rests, that I might rest on them and hold myself up by them." And sure enough, he does. And that's when Samson, in his biggest moment of weakness, he has nothing left that he can do. He cries out to God one last time, and he says, "O Lord God, please remember me. Please strengthen me just this time. O God, that I may at once be avenged of the Philistine for my 2 eyes." Then Samson grasped the two middle pillars on which the house rested. He braced himself against them, the one with his right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he bent with all his might so that the house fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he killed in his life. Now, it's easy to read this story, and when I was young, it was like, no, Samson got the last laugh. He's the one that overcame his enemies. And surely the Lord allowed him to do that, right? The Lord actually did bless him back with his strength so that he could bring judgment on the Philistines, these people who were doing harsh and terrible things to the Israelites. But in the end, his strength still only brought death. Still only brought this pain and struggling that we so often try to operate out of, trying to do things on our own, trying to make sure, no, I've got this. No, I've got this. Even in the end, he doesn't say, "Lord, give me freedom." He doesn't say, "Lord, give me peace." He says, "Lord, give me the strength that I might kill my enemies." He's still very much focused on his own story. And in that way, the story of Samson is a very sad one. It does not end with him going anywhere with his life. It doesn't end with him riding off into the sunset like so many of our comic book heroes get to. It ends with him choosing violence in order to get his vengeance, instead of allowing revenge to belong to God, vengeance to belong to the Lord. And so in that, we see a picture of what happens when we try to operate through our strength. Sometimes the Lord will even give us the desires that we so desperately seek so that we can do what we want. But at the end, we find out just how empty they can be. And like I said, growing up, I loved the Olympics. But there's one story of an Olympian who my father knew, who I won't name because I know him personally, and I don't want to share his story without his permission. But he won the Olympic gold in wrestling, and he made it all the way home, and he realized that that gold was all he ever fought for in his entire life. And now, the moment that he was chasing, the moment he built his entire life around was over. He threw that gold medal in the trash. Thankfully, his mother saw it and saved it. And now he has it, and he's come to terms with it. But the strength of which it took for him to wrestle with everything that happened and go forward and win this Olympic medal brought him only a moment. And in the end, it was fleeting. And when we live out of our strength, when we live out of all that we have control over, that's all that we can ever hope to gain, is but a moment of satisfaction. And then it is fleeting. It runs away from us. It escapes us. And there's nothing we can do to capture it back. Time is a fickle thing, and it continues to roll on. And so in this week, I really want to continue to wrestle with different characters in the Bible that bless us, our own stories that can guide us in how we can relinquish control, surrender to God, and live out of our weakness, that we might allow Him to use the soil of our pain to bring blessings for us and those who we love. And so I challenge you this week, continue to think through, how can I live out of my weakness instead of planting myself in my strength and surrendering to the danger of allowing all that I've ever hoped for to come and go in but a fleeting moment. We'll see you tomorrow, Yosemite Church. Continue to pray, continue to wrestle with God. Many blessings.